After he was kicked out of the system at 17, a young man inherited a single, worthless Quonset hut in the middle of nowhere. But what he discovered underground would not only change his life, but redefine the meaning of family, sacrifice, and home. If you've ever felt lost or abandoned, if you've ever had to fight for your place in the world, then this story is for you. Stick around, and if it resonates, maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're building a community here for people who get it. The day I turned 18 was the day I legally ceased to exist as a problem for the state of California. There was no cake. There was just a manila envelope on the scratched laminate desk of Mr. Henderson, my case manager for the final 2 years of my sentence in the system. He wasn't a bad guy, just a tired one. The kind of tired that seeps into the walls of a place like the Northgate Group Home for Boys. He slid the envelope across the desk. It made a dry, scraping sound. Inside was my birth certificate, a Social Security card that looked like a forgery, $200 in cash, and a one-way bus ticket to a town in Wyoming I'd never heard of. Covenant. "Happy birthday, Leo," he said, his voice flat. He looked at the clock on the wall, a standard-issue institutional clock, its second hand sweeping in a merciless, steady rhythm. Time was always the enemy in a place like this. It was either moving too slowly, trapping you in an endless afternoon, or it was running out. For me, it had just run out. I didn't say anything. I just picked up the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy and impossibly light at the same time. It was the sum total of my life, and it was almost nothing. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling another, smaller envelope from his desk drawer. This one was different. It was thick, creamy paper, the kind I'd only seen in movies. My name was written on the front in a spidery, unfamiliar hand. "This came for you, from a law firm. Your grandfather, Silas Blackwood, passed away a few months ago. He left you something." I stared at the name, Silas Blackwood. I knew the name, of course. He was a ghost, a myth in my life story. My mother's father. He'd taken me in for a few months after she died, when I was 5. I have only fleeting, dreamlike memories of that time. The smell of pine and cold air, the rough texture of a wool blanket, a deep voice that rarely spoke. Then one day he was gone, and I was in my first foster home. I was told he'd abandoned me. The word they used was surrendered. It sounded like a defeat. After a while, I stopped thinking about him at all. It was easier that way. Now he was dead, and he'd left me something. A bitter, hollow laugh almost escaped my lips. What could a man who surrendered me possibly leave behind? A box of regrets? An apology note written 20 years too late? "What is it?" I asked, my voice raspy. "The lawyer said it's a piece of property," Henderson said, already sounding bored of the conversation. He was looking at the next file on his desk. My file was closed. "Some land out in Wyoming, where the bus ticket goes." He shrugged. "Probably not worth much. Back taxes are owed. But it's yours. There's a number for the lawyer in there. You're supposed to call her." The finality of it was suffocating. I was being released not into freedom, but into an exile I hadn't chosen, to claim an inheritance I didn't want, from a man who had thrown me away. The institutional gray of the office, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint smell of disinfectant, this had been my world. And as much as I hated it, it was the only world I knew. Now I was being pushed out the door with a bus ticket to the middle of nowhere. I stood up. The chair squeaked against the linoleum. "That's it?" I asked. "That's it," Henderson confirmed, not looking up. "Good luck, Leo." I walked out of his office, down the long, echoing hallway I had walked 1,000 times before. I didn't look back. There was nothing to look back at. The bus station was a vortex of noise and exhaust fumes. People rushed past me, their faces set with purpose. They were all going somewhere, to someone. I was just going away. I found a payphone that smelled like stale cigarettes and desperation, and with trembling fingers, I dialed the number for the lawyer. My $200 wouldn't last long, and I needed to know what I was walking into. The phone rang 3 times, then a crisp, professional voice answered. "Albright Law?" "Hello," I stammered, my voice feeling small in the cavernous station. "My name is Leo Vance. I was told to call you about Silas Blackwood." There was a pause, the sound of rustling papers. "Ah, yes, Mr. Vance. I'm Sarah Albright. I was the executor of your grandfather's will. I've been expecting your call." Her voice was calm, measured. It was the kind of voice that delivered bad news without flinching. "I'm Sarah for your loss." I didn't know how to respond to that. How do you mourn a man you barely knew, a man whose only tangible impact on your life was his absence? "Right," I said. "The letter. Mr. Henderson said he left me some land." "He did," she confirmed. "A 40-acre parcel about 20 miles outside of Covenant. He was quite specific that it was to pass to you, and only you, upon your 18th birthday. I could hear her typing in the background. "Now, we need to discuss the realities of the situation, Mr. Vance. The land is, to be frank, not prime real estate. It's undeveloped, remote, and the soil is poor. Furthermore, your grandfather fell behind on the property taxes for the last 3 years. The county has a lien on the property. You owe just over $6,000. My stomach dropped. $6,000. I had 200. It might as well have been $1 million. The sounds of the bus station faded into a dull roar in my ears. "I don't have that kind of money," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I understand," she said, though I doubted she could. "Which brings me to the second matter. A development firm, Westward Horizons, has been trying to acquire parcels in that area for some time. They're planning a large-scale resort community. They made an offer on your grandfather's land before he passed, which he refused. They've now extended that offer to you. They're offering $10,000 for the parcel." My mind spun. $10,000. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding. It would be a fresh start. I could go anywhere, be anyone. I could leave the ghost of Silas Blackwood and the wreckage of my childhood behind for good. Forget Wyoming. Forget some worthless patch of dirt. "They'll also cover all the back taxes and legal fees," she added, as if sweetening a deal that already felt like a miracle. "All you have to do is sign the papers. I can have them drawn up and sent to you wherever you are." It was the smart choice, the only choice. A clean break, a ticket to a real life. But something held me back. A flicker of a memory, perhaps. The scent of pine, the weight of a heavy blanket, a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. Why would a man who lived on a worthless piece of land, a man so poor he couldn't pay his taxes, refuse an offer of $10,000? "What's on the land?" I asked. "I beg your pardon?" "The property. Is there anything on it? A house?" There was another pause, more typing. "The county records list a single structure," she said. "An outbuilding. A Quonset hut, to be specific. Utilities are off-grid. A well for water, a generator for power. It's rustic. A single metal hut on 40 acres of bad soil. And he'd turned down $10,000 for it. It made no sense. It was the decision of a madman, or a man who knew something that I didn't. "I'm on a bus to Covenant," I heard myself say, the words surprising me as much as they probably surprised her. "I want to see it first." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost feel her disapproval, her professional patience wearing thin. I was a kid from a group home, a stray, and I was turning down a golden ticket for a sentimental whim. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "Westwood's offer is time-sensitive. They want to close before the end of the month. If you can't pay the back taxes by then, the county will seize the property and auction it off. Westwood will almost certainly acquire it then, for far less than they are offering you. You will be left with nothing." "Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, my hand tightening on the receiver. "I still want to see it." Another sigh, this one audible. "Very well. The bus will drop you at the depot in town. There's a key to the property waiting for you there, in a lockbox at the ticket counter. The code is your birthday, 4 digits. Your grandfather set it up." My birthday, the day he surrendered me, was coded into the key that would let me into his world. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. "When you get there," she continued, "and you see what you've inherited, call me. The offer will still be on the table, for a little while." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I had just made the first real decision of my adult life, and it was, by any rational measure, an incredibly stupid one. I was walking away from a fortune to chase a ghost across a frozen wasteland. But as I hung up the phone and walked toward the bay where my bus was idling, a strange feeling settled over me. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something quieter, deeper. It was curiosity. I had to know why. The bus ride was a 2-day journey through the slow decay of one world and the stark birth of another. I watched the sprawling, sun-bleached concrete of California give way to the neon-dusted deserts of Nevada, then the vast, empty salt flats of Utah. I slept with my head against the vibrating window, the manila envelope tucked inside my jacket, a hard, rectangular presence against my ribs. Other passengers got on and off, a shifting cast of characters with their own stories, their own destinations. I said nothing to any of them. I was a ghost at my own feast, invisible. My world had shrunk to the confines of the bus, the hiss of the air brakes, and the endless ribbon of asphalt unreeling before us. As we crossed into Wyoming, the landscape changed again. The world flattened out, then buckled into rolling brown hills dotted with sagebrush. The sky grew bigger, a pale, endless blue that seemed to press down on the earth. It was a beautiful and terrifying emptiness. It was a land that didn't care about you, a land that could swallow you whole. I thought about the $10,000. I thought about what it could buy me. A small apartment in a city I'd never seen. New clothes. A life where no one knew my history. A life without the word Ward attached to my name. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to call Ms. Albright back, to tell her I'd made a mistake, to take the deal. But I couldn't. It felt like selling a book without reading the last chapter. My grandfather, this man of myth and silence, had written a story, and for some reason, he had made me the ending. I owed it to him, and maybe to myself, to at least read the words. The bus finally wheezed into Covenant late in the afternoon on the second day. The town wasn't much more than a wide spot in the road. A main street with a handful of brick-fronted buildings, a diner, a hardware store, a bar with a flickering neon sign, and the bus depot, which was little more than a single room attached to a gas station. I stepped off the bus, and the cold hit me like a physical blow. It was a dry, biting cold that seemed to find every gap in my thin California jacket. The air was so clear it felt sharp in my lungs. I stood on the cracked pavement, my duffel bag in my hand, and watched the bus pull away, its red taillights shrinking in the twilight until they were gone. I was alone. Truly, utterly alone. A man in greasy overalls at the gas station counter grunted in the direction of the lockboxes when I asked about a package for Leo Vance. I found the box, my fingers numb as I fumbled with the combination lock. 0814. August 14th. The lock clicked open. Inside was a single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key. It was ornate, with a complex, almost floral head. It looked like a key to a castle, not a Quonset hut. There was nothing else. No note, no instructions, just this cold, silent piece of metal. I clutched it in my hand. It was real. This was all real. I asked the man at the counter about a taxi. He laughed, a short, barking sound. "Taxi? Son, you're in Covenant. Your options are Henderson's Towing or you walk." He pointed a thumb toward the bar. "Henderson's usually at the Bighorn by now. If you can convince him you're not going to be trouble, he might give you a ride." The Bighorn was dark and smelled of stale beer and fried onions. A few old-timers sat at the bar, nursing their drinks and watching a game on the television. I felt their eyes on me as I walked in, the outsider, the city kid. I described the location Ms. Albright had given me to the bartender, who pointed me to a large, bearded man in a flannel shirt sitting alone in a booth. That was Henderson. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my worn-out sneakers and my thin jacket. "Silas's grandkid, huh?" he said, his voice a low rumble. "Heard he passed. He was a strange one, your grandpa. Kept to himself." "I need a ride out to his property," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a long swallow of his beer. "It's 20 miles of bad road. It'll cost you $50. $50, a quarter of my entire net worth. I nodded, my throat tight. "Okay." He stared at me for another long moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "All right," he said finally, pushing himself out of the booth. "Finish your drink, but I'm not waiting around, and I'm not helping you unload. It's a drop-off, that's it." The ride in his tow truck was bumpy and mostly silent. The truck's headlights cut a weak yellow path through the deepening darkness. We left the faint lights of Covenant behind, and soon there was nothing but the sagebrush and the immense, star-dusted sky. The emptiness out here was even more profound than it had looked from the bus. It was a physical presence. I could feel the weight of all that silent land around me. "You planning on staying out here?" Henderson asked suddenly, not taking his eyes off the dirt road. "Don't know yet," I said. It was the truth. He grunted. "Not much for a kid out here. Cold gets into your bones. Wind'll drive you crazy if you let it. Silas, he was built for it. Different breed." He fell silent again. After what felt like an eternity, he slowed the truck and pointed. "There she is." In the high beams, I saw it. Perched on a slight rise, silhouetted against the night sky, was the Quonset hut. It was a perfect half-cylinder of corrugated metal, stark and featureless. It looked less like a home and more like a piece of military equipment left behind after a forgotten war. There were no lights on, No signs of life. Just this silent, metal shell in the middle of an ocean of darkness. Henderson pulled the truck to a stop at the base of a rutted driveway. "This is as far as I go," he said. "You sure about this, kid? I can take you back to town. There's a motel." I looked from his face, etched with a rough sort of concern, to the dark shape on the hill. This was it. The end of the line. The final chapter. "I'm sure," I said. I paid him the $50, my hand shaking slightly. He took it, his gaze lingering on my face for a second too long. "The key fits the padlock on the door," he said. "There's wood for the stove inside, and canned food. Silas was always prepared. You get into trouble, you start walking east. You'll hit the highway eventually." Then he put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving me in a cloud of dust and utter silence. The sound of his engine faded, and then there was nothing. Nothing but the whisper of the wind through the sagebrush and the frantic beating of my own heart. I stood there for a long time, the iron key clutched in my hand, my duffel bag at my feet. The cold was seeping into me now, a deep, invasive chill. I looked up at the hut. It was my inheritance. A cold, empty metal box in the middle of nowhere. For the first time, I felt a tremor of real fear. The $10,000 felt like a warm, distant dream. I had chosen this. I had chosen this place over a new life. And standing there, in the crushing silence and the biting cold, I was terrifyingly certain I had made a catastrophic mistake. With a deep breath that stung my lungs, I picked up my bag and began the walk up the hill. The door was a simple, flat piece of steel, secured with a heavy-duty padlock that looked far more robust than the door itself. The iron key slid into the lock with a satisfying metallic click. It turned smoothly, and the lock sprang open. The door groaned in protest as I pulled it wide, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. I stepped inside, and a wave of stale, cold air washed over me. It smelled of dust, old wood smoke, and something else. Something faintly metallic and clean, like a machine shop. I fumbled along the wall for a light switch, but my fingers found nothing. Of course, off-grid. I dug a small flashlight out of my duffel bag, the one I'd kept under my pillow at the group home. Its beam cut a shaky circle through the absolute blackness. The interior was one long, cavernous space, the curved metal walls amplifying the sense of emptiness. To one side was a small pot-bellied wood stove, a neat stack of firewood beside it. To the other, a simple cot with a folded wool blanket, the same rough texture I remembered. In the center was a heavy wooden table and a single chair, and along the far wall, shelves, floor-to-ceiling shelves, filled with military-style ammunition cans, neatly labeled in the same spidery handwriting as the envelope. Rice, beans, water purification, first aid. It was the pantry of a man who was expecting the world to end. There was a small partitioned-off corner with a chemical toilet and a hand-pump sink. That was it. This was the entire dwelling. A place to sleep, a place to eat, a place to wait. My heart sank. This was what I'd given up $10,000 for? A survivalist's bunker? Ms. Albright was right. I was a fool. I dropped my bag on the floor, the sound echoing in the metal tube. Defeated, I walked over to the cot and sat down. The blanket was coarse against my hand. I ran the flashlight beam around the room again, a profound sense of anticlimax settling over me. This was my legacy. A cold, lonely shelter built by a cold, lonely man. My eyes fell on something I hadn't noticed before. Under the cot, pushed back against the wall, was a dark green, military-style footlocker. It was a standard-issued chest, but what caught my attention was the small, stenciled lettering on the front. Leo. My name. My breath hitched. I pulled the footlocker out. It was heavy, solid. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid, my heart hammering against my ribs. Inside, it was meticulously organized. On top lay a thick, sealed envelope, identical to the one I'd received from the lawyer. My name was on it, in that same familiar script. Beneath it were several stacks of what looked like blueprints, rolled up and tied with string. And under those, a layer of tools, a heavy-duty wrench, a crowbar, a set of socket wrenches. I set the blueprints and tools aside and picked up the envelope. My hands were trembling now. This was it. The apology note. The explanation. The reason for the silence. I tore it open. Inside were several pages, filled with that same tight, controlled handwriting. I took a deep breath and began to read. Leo, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I am not good with words. I am better with engines and gears and concrete. But I will try. I imagine you have questions. I imagine you hate me. You have every right. They told you I abandoned you. It is what I wanted them to tell you. It was safer for you that way. The words hit me with a physical force. Safer? How was being thrown into the labyrinth of the foster care system safer? I read on, my anger mixing with a desperate confusion. Your mother, my daughter, was a good person, but she fell in with a bad crowd. The man who was your father, he was not a good man. He was involved in things, dangerous things. When she died, they came looking for something they thought she had. They came looking for you. I took you in, and for 6 months I kept you safe. But they found us. They were not the kind of people you can reason with. They were not the kind of people the police can stop. They are a system, a network. So I made a choice. I made a deal. A cold dread trickled down my spine. A deal. I gave them everything I had. The money from the sale of my house in California, my savings, everything. In exchange, they would leave you alone. But there was a condition. I had to disappear, and you had to disappear, into a place they could never trace you, the state system. It was the last place they would look for the grandson of a man like me. It was the perfect camouflage. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, Leo, to hand you over to strangers, to let you think I had abandoned you. It was a sacrifice. Not for me, for you. I came out here, to this piece of forgotten land, and I waited. I monitored you from a distance, through back channels and private investigators I paid, with what little I could scrape together. I knew every home you were in. I knew every struggle. And every day I worked. I built this place, for you. I had to stop reading. My vision was blurry. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, my whole body shaking. Abandonment. Surrender. They were lies. Lies I had built my entire identity around. My grandfather hadn't thrown me away. He had hidden me. The entire narrative of my life, the story of the unwanted boy, it all fractured and fell apart in the space of a few paragraphs. He hadn't been a ghost. He had been a guardian angel, watching from a desolate outpost in the wilderness. I took a few ragged breaths, the cold air searing my throat, and forced myself to continue reading. This place, this hut, it is not what it seems. It is only the lock on the door. Your inheritance is not this piece of land. It is what is beneath it. The developers, Westward Horizons, they want this land. They think it is for the water rights. They are wrong. They want it because of what they buried here years ago, long before I bought it. They think their secrets are safe. They are wrong about that too. I built you a home, Leo. I built you a fortress, and I built you a choice. In this locker, you will find blueprints and tools. The real work begins now. Be smart. Be careful. Trust no one, especially not at first. The world is not a kind place, but you can make your own corner of it safe. This is my legacy. Not land, not money. It is a chance, a second chance. Your grandfather, Silas. I let the letter fall into my lap. My mind was reeling. A fortress, beneath the land. Secrets. It felt like something out of a movie, not my life. I looked at the blueprints. I unrolled the first one. It was a detailed architectural drawing. On the top, in block letters, it read, Habitation Module, Level 1. It showed the Quonset hut I was in, labeled Entry/Workshop. And then, beneath it, connected by a dotted line labeled Hydraulic Lift, See Detail C, was another identical Quonset hut, labeled Living Quarters. My eyes scanned the drawing, my heart pounding. There were notes all over it. Reinforced concrete foundation 12 feet deep. Sealed access hatch beneath welding table. Ventilation system disguised as well pump housing. I scrambled to my feet, the flashlight beam dancing wildly around the room. I found the welding table he mentioned. It was a heavy steel bench in the corner, cluttered with old tools and pieces of scrap metal. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But according to the blueprint, it was hiding a door to another world. I grabbed the crowbar from the footlocker. My hands were slick with sweat despite the cold. I started clearing the junk off the table, my movements frantic. Old wrenches, rusted gears, metal shavings. Finally, the surface was clear. I ran my hands over the cold steel. There were no visible seams, no handles. I consulted the blueprint again. Release mechanism. Engage 3/4 inch socket on hexagonal bolt head, rear left leg. I knelt down, shining the light on the legs of the table. They were thick steel posts, bolted to the concrete floor. On the rear left leg, just as the drawing indicated, was a single, large hexagonal bolt head, painted the same color as the leg, almost perfectly camouflaged. I found the right socket wrench from the kit, my fingers fumbling. The fit was perfect. I attached the handle and pulled. It was stiff. I put my weight into it, gritting my teeth. With a loud metallic groan, the bolt turned. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hiss of displaced air, a section of the concrete floor directly beneath the table began to descend. It wasn't a hatch flipping open. The entire slab of concrete, with the table bolted to it, was lowering into the ground like an elevator. I backed away, my breath caught in my throat, watching as a dark, rectangular opening was revealed in the floor. A set of steep metal stairs led down into the blackness. The air that rose from the opening was different. It was cool, but not cold, and it was dry, with the clean, sterile smell of circulated air. It smelled like the future. My grandfather hadn't just built a shelter. He had built a secret, a whole world hidden beneath a single, unassuming metal hut. I stood at the edge of the abyss, the flashlight beam disappearing into the depths. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to close the hatch, to call the lawyer and take the money and run as far away from this place as I could. This was not a normal inheritance. This was something else entirely, something dangerous. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to see what he had built. For me. With the letter clutched in my hand, I took the first step down into the darkness. The metal stairs were steep and narrow, ringing with each step I took. The darkness was absolute, swallowing the beam of my flashlight. The air grew warmer as I descended, the sterile scent becoming more pronounced. After about 20 feet, my boots hit a solid floor. I swung the light around. I was in a short, narrow hallway, about 10 feet long, constructed of smooth, poured concrete. The walls were bare, except for a single, heavy, submarine-style door at the far end, with a large wheel for a handle. It felt like I was boarding a ship buried under the earth. The wheel was stiff, but it turned under my hands. With a final, heavy clunk, the locking mechanisms disengaged. I pulled the door open and stepped through. The change was instantaneous and disorienting. I was standing in a space that was identical in size and shape to the Quonset hut above, but it was a different universe. The curved walls were paneled in a warm, light-colored wood. The floor was covered in a simple, durable gray carpet. Soft, indirect lighting emanated from fixtures hidden along the ceiling, bathing the entire space in a calm, steady glow. It was a home. On one side, there was a compact but complete kitchen, a small electric stove, a refrigerator humming quietly, a sink with a modern faucet. On the other side was a living area, a comfortable-looking sofa, a bookshelf filled with paperbacks, a small desk with a chair. At the far end, a proper bed, neatly made, with a thick comforter. It was clean, organized, and eerily preserved, as if my grandfather had just stepped out for a moment. I walked slowly through the space, my boots silent on the carpet. I ran my hand along the smooth kitchen counter. I touched the spine of a book on the shelf. It was all real. He had built this, piece by piece, in secret, beneath 40 acres of forgotten land. This was the home he couldn't give me above ground. On the desk, another envelope was waiting for me, propped against a small black and white photograph. My name was on the front. I picked up the photo first. It was of a young woman with a bright, defiant smile, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. My mother. And me. I had never seen a picture of us together before. A wave of grief, so sharp and sudden it buckled my knees, washed over me. I sank into the desk chair, staring at her face, a face I barely remembered. She was so young, so full of life. After a moment, I picked up the letter. Leo, if you've made it this far, you've passed the first test. You are not afraid of the dark. This is your home now. The power comes from a geothermal generator I drilled for. The water is from a deep aquifer, triple filtered. The air is circulated and scrubbed. You are safe here, safer than anywhere on Earth. I lived down here for the last 15 years. The hut above was just for show. A place for the taxman to inspect. A place for Henderson to drop off supplies when I needed them. No one ever knew about this. The food you saw above is your short-term supply. The real pantry is through the door at the far end of this level. But we'll get to that. First, we need to talk about Westward Horizons, the development company, the reason I brought you here. I leaned forward, my elbows on the desk, my eyes glued to the page. They are not just developers, Leo. They are a front. The man who runs it, a man named Marcus Thorne, he was your father's boss. When your father died, he cleaned house. But there was a ledger. Your father was their accountant. He kept a detailed record of their real business, illegal dumping of industrial waste, toxic, dangerous stuff. They bought up cheap, remote land under shell corporations, buried the evidence, and moved on. Thorne believed your mother took the ledger before she died. He believed she passed it to me. He was right. My blood ran cold. The ledger. That's what they had been looking for. That's why they'd hunted him. That's why he had to hide me. I couldn't go to the authorities. Thorn has people everywhere. Judges, cops. The system that was supposed to protect you is the same system that protects him. So I hid, and I planned. I found this piece of land because I knew it was one of their old dumping grounds. I bought it, and I started digging. Not for the ledger. I already had that. I was digging for proof. The blueprints in the footlocker will show you the other 2 modules I built. One is a workshop. The other is a laboratory. It has an access tunnel that leads directly to one of the buried waste caches. I have spent years gathering samples, running tests, and documenting everything. The evidence is irrefutable. It's all stored in the 4th and final module, the vault. Now, you have a choice. It's the most important choice of your life. In the vault, along with the evidence, is a significant amount of cash. It's the money I made them give me for my silence, plus interest I've accrued through careful investments. It's enough for you to disappear, to go anywhere in the world, live a comfortable life, and never look back. You can take it, seal this place up forever, and be free. No one would blame you. You have earned a life of peace. I stopped reading, my head spinning. The money. A way out. A real way out. Not just the $10,000 from the sale, but a fortune. The ultimate escape. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. To be free of the past, free of the fight. To just be. But the letter wasn't finished. Or, it continued, you can stay. You can use the evidence to finish what I started. You can bring them down. It will not be easy. It will be dangerous. Thorn will not go down without a fight. But you will not be alone. The lawyer, Ms. Albright, her father was a district attorney, a good man who was ruined by Thorn's network years ago. She has been waiting for an opportunity like this her whole life. She doesn't know the details yet, but she knows I was building a case. She can be trusted. The choice is yours, Leo. A life of quiet freedom bought with my silence, or a life of purpose fought for with the truth. I cannot make it for you. All I could do was build the battlefield and hand you the sword. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of the man you have become. Know that every day of my exile was a prayer for your safety. Know that you were never, not for 1 second, abandoned. You were protected. You were loved. I let the letter fall from my fingers. I looked at the photograph of my mother, then around the warm, safe room my grandfather had built for me with his own 2 hands. I cried. I cried for the little boy who thought he'd been thrown away. I cried for the teenager who had built a shell of anger and indifference to survive. I cried for the mother I never knew, and the grandfather I had misjudged so completely. And I cried for the man who had spent 15 years in a hole in the ground, alone, all to give me this choice. A choice between running and fighting. For the first time, I wasn't just a survivor, a piece of flotsam tossed on the waves of a system I couldn't control. I was the heir to a legacy of resistance. He hadn't just left me a fortress and a fortune. He had left me a purpose. The weight of it was immense, terrifying. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. The ground my grandfather had built for me, 12 feet under. I spent the next hour exploring my new home. The living quarters were a marvel of efficiency. Every inch of space was used. Behind sliding panels were storage closets. The bed folded up into the wall to create more space. It was a masterpiece of compact design, born of necessity and a brilliant, practical mind. At the far end of the habitation module, as the letter had indicated, was another heavy, wheel-locked door. I opened it and stepped into the third Quonset hut, the pantry and hydroponics lab. The air here was warm and humid, smelling of rich earth and growing things. Rows of shelves were lined with preserved foods in glass jars, a vibrant tapestry of color. Pickled vegetables, canned fruits, dried meats. It was a testament to years of patient, solitary work. But the most incredible part was the hydroponics system. Under the warm glow of full-spectrum grow lights, trays of lush green vegetables were thriving. Lettuce, tomatoes, peppers, herbs. A complex system of pipes and pumps circulated nutrient-rich water, all of it automated, controlled by a panel on the wall. My grandfather hadn't just built a place to hide, he had built a place to live. A self-sustaining ecosystem, a pocket of life buried in the frozen earth. He had planned for everything. I stood there for a long time, just breathing in the smell of living things. After a lifetime of institutional food, of gray meals on plastic trays, the sight of all this fresh, vibrant life felt like a miracle. It was a promise that life could not only be sustained here, but it could flourish. I returned to the living quarters, my mind clearer, my resolve hardening. There was one more door to open. According to the blueprints, it was located back in the first hut, the workshop upstairs. A separate module, accessible only from the surface. The vault. I climbed the metal stairs, the air growing cold again as I ascended. I closed the heavy floor hatch, and the sound of the hydraulic lift seating itself back into place was a deep, reassuring thud. The workshop was just as I had left it, cold and dark, except for my flashlight beam. I consulted the blueprints again. The entrance to the fourth module was even more cleverly hidden. The plans showed one of the large floor-to-ceiling shelving units, the one filled with ammo cans labeled spare parts, was actually a false front. It was on a set of hidden casters, designed to swing away from the wall. The release was a latch hidden inside a specific empty ammo can on the third shelf. I found the shelf, my heart thumping. I ran my hand along the row of identical green cans. I found the one that felt lighter than the others. I opened it. Inside, instead of spare generator parts, was a simple lever. I pulled it. There was a soft click, and the entire shelving unit shifted slightly. I gave it a push, and it swung outward with surprising ease, revealing a section of the curved metal wall that was not corrugated like the rest. It was a flat, smooth steel plate, and in the center of it was a high-security combination lock, the kind you see on bank vaults. The letter. I had been so overwhelmed by the story it told, I'd forgotten the postscript at the bottom of the last page. I pulled it from my pocket. P.S. The vault combination is the day I lost your mother and the day I found you again. 8 digits. My mother's birthday, and my own. I didn't know her birthday. It wasn't on my birth certificate, and no one in the system had ever thought to tell me. I felt a surge of frustration. Then I remembered the photograph on the desk downstairs. I hurried back down, my boots clanging on the stairs. I snatched the photo and turned it over. On the back, in my grandfather's hand, Eleanor, May 10th, 1982 to October 4th, 2005. October 4th. My birthday was August 14th, 10/0/40/814. I raced back upstairs, my breath misting in the cold air. I knelt before the vault door, my fingers shaking as I spun the dial. Right to 10, left to 4, right to 8, left to 14. There was a loud, satisfying thud as the tumblers aligned and the handle disengaged. I pulled the heavy steel door open. The fourth Quonset hut was not a home or a workshop. It was a command center. The air was chilled to preserve its contents. One wall was lined with filing cabinets, each drawer meticulously labeled. Soil samples, water tables, Thorne's corporate history, financials. On a long steel table in the center of the room sat a powerful-looking computer, its screen dark. And against the far wall, stacked neatly on metal pallets, were dozens of black, hard-shell cases. I opened one. It was full of cash. Stacks of $100 bills, vacuum-sealed in plastic. I opened another, and another. It was all the same. I couldn't even begin to guess how much was there. Hundreds of thousands, maybe more. This was it, the choice made real. A life of freedom stacked in black boxes. Next to the computer was a single leather-bound book, the ledger. I opened it. The pages were filled with columns of numbers and cryptic notes, a detailed, damning record of a criminal empire. And next to the ledger, a small digital audio recorder with a note taped to it that said only, "Play me." I pressed the play button. A familiar voice, low and rumbling, filled the cold, silent space. It was my grandfather's voice, but it was clearer, closer than the fragmented memories of my childhood. "Leo," the voice said, the sound slightly tinny but full of a weary gravity. "If you are hearing this, then you have found it all. You have the evidence, you have the money, you have the choice. I wanted to tell you this myself, to look you in the eye when I said it, but time ran out. There's no shame in taking the money and walking away. None. I built this escape hatch for you. I want you to be happy. I want you to be safe. But," he paused, and I could hear him take a breath, "but if you choose to fight, you will be honoring your mother. She was trying to expose them when she died. She was brave, braver than me. This was her fight first. And if you choose to stay, this land, it's more than just a fortress. It's a home. It needs a caretaker. It needs someone to tend the garden, to maintain the systems, to keep the flame alive. It could be a good life, a hard life, but a good one. A life of purpose." The recording clicked off, leaving an echoing silence. A life of purpose. The phrase hung in the air. I looked at the stacks of money, the ticket to anywhere. Then I looked at the ledger, the key to justice. For 17 years, my life had been about survival, about getting through the day, about being small and quiet and not making trouble. I'd never had a purpose beyond just making it to the next day. Now I was being offered one. It was terrifying. The forces my grandfather had described were vast and powerful. I was just one kid, an 18-year-old with a high school equivalency diploma and a lifetime of trauma. What could I possibly do? But then I thought of him, my grandfather, alone in this hole for 15 years, drilling, digging, planning. I thought of my mother, who had been brave enough to take on a criminal empire. They hadn't run. They had fought. They had lost, but they had fought. And now, the fight was mine. If you've made it this far into my story, maybe you know what this feels like. To be standing at a crossroads, with the easy path stretching out before you, warm and inviting, and the hard path disappearing into darkness and uncertainty. Maybe you've had to make a choice like that in your own life, a choice that defines who you are, not just to the world, but to yourself. If you have, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. We call this a community because we're all on a journey, and sharing our stories is how we light the way for each other. Now let's get back to what I decided to do, standing there in that cold, silent vault. I stood there for what felt like hours, the silence broken only by the hum of the air circulators. I weighed the two futures in my hands. One was a ghost's life, a life of comfort and anonymity, forever looking over my shoulder. The other was a warrior's life, a life of risk and meaning, standing on the foundations my grandfather had laid. I closed the hard-shell case full of money. I picked up the ledger. It felt heavier than all the cash combined. I walked out of the vault, leaving the money behind, and sealed the heavy door. I spun the combination lock, and the tumblers fell into place with a final, decisive thud. My choice was made. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed for the first time in my life. The light in the habitation module was on a timer, simulating a natural dawn. I made breakfast in my own kitchen, with food grown by my grandfather's own hands. It was the best meal I'd ever eaten. Then I went to the desk, sat down, and called Ms. Albright. Her voice was just as crisp and professional as before, but I could hear a note of surprise when I told her who was calling. "Mr. Vance," she said, "I was expecting your call yesterday. Have you had a chance to look at the property? Are you ready to accept Westward's offer?" "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'm not selling." There was a long pause. "Mr. Vance, Leo, we discussed this. You cannot afford to back taxes. The county will seize the property. You will be left with nothing. This is not a wise decision." "I'll be paying the back taxes myself," I said. "I'll have a bank transfer for the full amount sent to your office by the end of the day." I could almost hear her blink. You will? May I ask where you suddenly acquired $6,000? "My grandfather was a very resourceful man," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. It wasn't a lie. I'd gone back into the vault that morning and taken out exactly what I needed for the taxes and some initial living expenses. The rest remained untouched. A war chest. "Ms. Albright," I continued, my tone shifting from client to partner. "I'm not selling the land because what's on it and under it is more valuable than $10,000. My grandfather spent the last 15 years of his life building a case against Westward Horizons and its CEO, Marcus Thorne. I have his files, I have his evidence, and I have his ledger." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched for a full 10 seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely different. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by a low, intense energy I hadn't heard before. "What did you say his name was?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Marcus Thorne," I repeated. "My grandfather's notes say your father, the DA, had a history with him." I heard her take a sharp, shaky breath. "Leo," she said, and for the first time, she used my name like she knew me. "Stay where you are. Don't talk to anyone. Don't let anyone on the property. I'm driving out there. I'll be there in 3 hours." The line went dead. That was the beginning of the war. Ms. Albright, Sarah, arrived in a dusty Subaru, looking nothing like the crisp voice on the phone. She was younger than I'd expected, with tired eyes that held a fierce intelligence. She wore jeans and hiking boots, and she looked at the single Quonset hut with a practiced skepticism. I didn't show her the entrance to the lower levels, not at first. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. Trust no one, especially not at first. We sat at the heavy wooden table in the workshop, the cold air making our breath fog. I gave her a summary, withholding the details of the underground complex. I told her I had my grandfather's research, his samples, his documentation. I showed her the ledger. She spent an hour poring over it, her expression growing grimmer with each page she turned. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes boring into mine. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with a kind of awe. "This is what my father was looking for. He was destroyed because of this, because of Thorne. She told me her story. Her father had been a rising star in the Attorney General's office until he'd started investigating a string of suspicious land deals connected to Thorn. Suddenly, his career was derailed by false accusations. His reputation was ruined, and he died a broken man a few years later. Sarah had gone to law school for one reason: to find a way to finish what he'd started. "Your grandfather," she said, looking around the cold, empty hut. "He was a remarkable man." "You have no idea," I said. That's when I decided to trust her. I took a deep breath. "There's more," I said. "The real workshop is downstairs." I led her to the welding table and activated the lift. Her eyes widened as the floor descended, revealing the staircase. She followed me down without a word, her face a mask of disbelief. When we stepped into the warm, bright light of the habitation module, she stopped dead, her mouth slightly agape. "My God," she whispered. "He built all this?" I showed her everything. The living quarters, the hydroponics lab, the vault with its command center and filing cabinets full of evidence. She walked through the spaces like a pilgrim in a holy site, running her hand along the walls, her eyes taking in every detail of my grandfather's meticulous 15-year obsession. When we stood before the computer in the vault, she turned to me. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a steely determination. "Okay, Leo," she said. "Here's how we do this." The months that followed were a blur of intense, clandestine work. Sarah became my general, my teacher, and my only link to the outside world. She would drive out once or twice a week, bringing supplies I couldn't grow myself and legal books for me to study. We spent hours in the vault, digitizing my grandfather's files, cross-referencing the ledger with corporate filings she dug up, building an ironclad timeline of Thorn's crimes. My life fell into a new rhythm. I was no longer just a resident. I was the caretaker of my grandfather's creation. I learned the complex dance of the station's systems. I learned to calibrate the hydroponic nutrient flows, to service the geothermal generator, to patch the air filtration software my grandfather had written himself. I spent my days maintaining the physical structure and my nights studying law and corporate finance with Sarah. The empty, lonely boy from the group home was gone. In his place was a young man with a mission. The land that had once seemed so empty and hostile became my sanctuary. I would go up to the surface in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. The vast, silent landscape was no longer terrifying. It was peaceful. It was mine. The wind that had once chilled my bones now felt like a clean, purifying force. I was connected to this place, to the earth itself, in a way I had never been connected to anything. We knew Thorn and Westward Horizons would not take my refusal to sell lying down. The first sign of trouble came a few weeks after I'd paid the taxes. A sleek black SUV I didn't recognize drove up my driveway. I watched them from a hidden camera my grandfather had installed near the well pump. Two men in expensive suits got out. They walked around the Quonset hut, peering in the dusty windows, their city shoes ill-suited for the rough terrain. They looked confused, disappointed. This was not the headquarters of a man who was defying them. This was a derelict shed. They eventually got back in their car and left. Sarah's sources confirmed they were Thorn's lawyers. They were probing for weakness. The next move was more direct. I started getting official-looking letters. Notices of zoning violations I'd never heard of. Demands for environmental impact studies. It was harassment by bureaucracy, an attempt to bury me in paperwork and legal fees. But with Sarah's guidance, we answered every query, met every demand, using my grandfather's own meticulous records of the land to prove our case. They were trying to fight a ghost, and the ghost was better prepared than they were. The real escalation came about 6 months in. I was on the surface, checking the perimeter, when I saw the glint of sunlight on glass from a ridge about a mile away. Binoculars. They were watching me. From then on, I knew I was under surveillance. It was a chilling realization, but strangely, it didn't scare me as much as I thought it would. Down in my grandfather's fortress, I was untouchable. They could watch the empty hut all they wanted. They had no idea where I really was. They had no idea what I was building. The final piece of the puzzle came from my grandfather's computer. It was a hidden, encrypted file that took Sarah and me weeks to crack. Inside was a detailed geological survey of the area, showing a network of underground aquifers. The survey revealed that the spot where Thorn had buried his toxic waste was directly upstream from the main aquifer that supplied water to the entire region, including the town of Covenant. It wasn't just a crime, it was a ticking time bomb. Thorn didn't just want the land to hide his secret, he needed it to control the cleanup that would one day be inevitable, to spin it, to profit from the disaster he himself had created. That's when I knew we had him. We had the motive, the means, and a mountain of evidence. Sarah spent a week putting together the final package, a series of anonymous, untraceable data drops to a handful of trusted journalists, the EPA, and the one state prosecutor she knew was not in Thorn's pocket. The night we sent it, we sat together in the vault, the glow of the computer screen illuminating our tired faces. "This is it," she said softly. "Once we hit send, there's no going back." I looked at the screen, at the culmination of my grandfather's life's work, of my mother's sacrifice, of our last 6 months of relentless effort. I thought about the easy life I could have had, the money still sitting on the pallets behind me. I had no regrets. "Do it," I said. We watched the progress bar fill. Then, a simple message. Transmission complete. For a moment, we just sat in silence. We had fired the shot. Now we had to wait for the echo. The story broke 2 days later. It was a firestorm. The initial reports were cautious, but the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. The journalists we'd contacted started publishing their findings. The EPA confirmed they were opening an emergency investigation. The state prosecutor announced a grand jury. Thorn and Westward Horizons issued a series of denials, calling it a smear campaign by a competitor. But the dam had broken. More stories emerged. People my grandfather had documented, former employees, other landowners who had been threatened. They all started coming forward. The narrative Thorn had controlled for decades was crumbling. One evening, a week after the story broke, I got a call on the satellite phone my grandfather had left for emergencies. It was an unknown number. I answered. The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, and full of a cold fury. "Mr. Vance," it said. "Marcus Thorn. I have to admit, you and your grandfather have been a more significant nuisance than I anticipated. But this is over now. I'm prepared to make you one final offer. A new life, a new identity, and $10 million. All you have to do is recant your story. Say the evidence was fabricated. I'll even let you keep the land. Just disappear. $10 million. The final desperate move of a cornered animal. A year ago, I would have taken that deal without a second thought. I would have seen it as my salvation. But I wasn't that person anymore. I looked around the habitation module, at the home I had come to love, at the legacy I had chosen to uphold. "You know," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "my grandfather left me a home, a purpose, and the truth. And it turns out those things aren't for sale." I hung up the phone. The consequences of my choice were not just legal battles and media storms. They were personal. The community of Covenant, which had at first been suspicious of the strange kid who'd inherited the old recluse's land, started to change. Henderson, the tow truck driver, showed up one day, unannounced. He didn't say much. He just left a cord of perfectly split firewood by the door of the hut and a thermos of hot coffee. "Figured you could use it," he grunted before driving away. The bartender from the Bighorn started saving me a copy of the weekly paper. Small gestures, quiet acknowledgments. They knew I was fighting for their water, for their land. I was no longer an outsider. I was one of them. The legal battle raged for almost a year. Thorne fought with everything he had, but the evidence was too strong. He was eventually indicted, and Westward Horizons collapsed under the weight of lawsuits and federal investigations. It wasn't a perfect storybook ending. Some of his associates escaped justice. The cleanup of the land will take decades. But it was a victory, a real, tangible victory. My grandfather's fortress is my home now. I've started expanding the hydroponics garden, experimenting with new crops. I'm working with a local land trust, using my grandfather's geological surveys to help protect the region's water sources. I'm no longer hiding. The underground complex is still my secret, my sanctuary. But I live on the surface now, too. I'm building a small cabin near the Quonset hut, using wood from this land. I am putting down roots, literally and figuratively. Sometimes I stand on the ridge and look out over the vast, beautiful, and silent landscape, and I think about the strange path that brought me here. I was a boy who was thrown away, who inherited a tin can and a legacy of debt. But that inheritance, which seemed like a curse, was actually a key to a hidden world, a key to a forgotten past, and a key to a future I never could have imagined. It taught me that home isn't just a place you are given. It's a place you build. It's a place you protect. It's a place you fight for. And it taught me that the most valuable things we inherit are not money or property, but the stories of those who came before us and the choices they empower us to make. This entire journey started because I was faced with a choice: take the easy money or embrace a difficult truth. What my grandfather left me wasn't just a bunker. It was a question. What kind of person did I want to be? And I think, in the end, that's a question we all have to answer for ourselves. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose the harder right over the easier wrong, please consider subscribing and joining our community. More importantly, share your own story in the comments below. Tell me about the inheritance that shaped you, whether it was a gift, a burden, or a choice. Because every story shared is a light in the dark. And I promise you, I read every single one. You are not alone.